let's make Italian beef sandwiches. I'm starting off with a chuck roast and 2 beef short ribs. I'm going to be using my Dutch oven, and I want to show you why I prefer using my Dutch oven when possible over my slow cooker. So sometimes I've noticed even when people are home for several hours, they still fall back to using their slow cooker. And although I absolutely adore my slow cooker and I use it many times for many reasons, when I'm able to, if I'm home for several hours and I can get this started ahead of time, and either me, my husband, or an older child is home to kind of monitor it, I will always use my Dutch oven. So I also want to show you, we've done several Dutch oven roasts the last couple of weeks, and I want to show you how this meat right here can really feed a crowd. Stretch those dollars, stretch those meal plans, and let's get to using leftovers in a way that will feed our family for more than one day. Now that my meat is prepped, I'm going to get the beef seared. I think this is a step that tends to be underrated and skipped a lot. And I want to just tell you, even if you are going to use your slow cooker, still use this step. It is well worth it in the end. The flavor that you get, I think, is better. The texture that you get is better. You really want to lock in those flavors. I mean, there is good reason for doing this. And also, any bacteria issues that might be will be killed off in the long run, of course. I mean, you're cooking it for so long, but initially, this searing really does just kill off any bacteria naturally occurring, really. But when it comes to these short ribs, you absolutely want to take the time to sear every single side. And we're gonna sear the chuck roast itself, both sides as well. Now, let's say this was a different kind of meat and I'm kind of just searing it and removing it from the pot, then adding vegetables to kind of saute in there. Starting your meat out in the pot really helps to provide a flavor to the overall dish as well. And then, of course, if you're going to add vegetables like onions and things after this and kind of saute that and then add in some sort of a liquid to deglaze your pot, the flavor that that gives you is just incredible. All right, so I have both sides seared, and I'm going to play a little Tetris here on really crossing fingers and toes that I was able to get this all fit into my Dutch oven. I started kind of panicking, going, oopsie. But don't fear, I made it work, especially as it cooks after a couple hours. I mean, your meat really starts to shrink down a little bit, but I was able to get it to work. So now we're going to go ahead and add in all of our seasonings. If you have the packets, the individual packets of Italian dressing seasoning, go ahead and use maybe 1 to 2 of those packets. I don't measure. I just, I pour with my heart, but that's what I'm using here. I just buy it in bulk and reuse one of my containers. So that's essentially what that is. But then I also add in just the regular Italian blend of seasonings just to kind of amp up that flavor. Now, we salted and peppered this before we seared it, so we don't need to add any more salt and pepper. If you've made a Mississippi pot roast, this recipe is pretty much just like that, to be honest, except I I think that calls for ranch seasoning, and I don't use that in this particular Italian beef that I'm making. But I'm going to be putting in 2 jars of my home canned banana peppers. I did not use a pickle crisp in this batch last year, so they are a little bit soft. And so I do like using them in this type of a method rather than on, say, like a sub sandwich. But the brine, that flavor that it offers this dish on top of the banana pepper flavor is just incredible. You could just use a regular jar of banana peppers or pepperoncinis from the store. That would work in this place. A half a stick of butter and some better than beef base not chicken stock, better than beef base beef broth is gonna go into this pot as well. This is gonna go into an oven for 300 degrees, anywhere from, I would say, about 4 to 5 hours. You could start checking on it after 3, depending on the type of meat that you are using, but generally about 4 to 5 hours. And here, when I remove the lid, oh, I'm telling you, you cannot get that from a slow cooker. Look at the outside of that meat. I am telling you, it is incredible. When you use a slow cooker, all that meat stays pretty much underneath any liquid, and you still get the same effect. This is just as tender as it would be if you cooked it in a slow cooker, of course. So I'm going to work on getting this shredded up because we're using it today to make sandwiches. I have ciabatta rolls that we are going to make sandwiches out of. But while I am getting this sort of picked apart, shredded apart, I want to share with you how one roast and the 2 beef short ribs. I'm using the short ribs just because I have several of them in my freezer, and I'll be honest, I don't really like that cut of meat. There's way too much fat on it for my liking. So when I'm making a beef roast for anything, I will always grab a package of the short ribs and add it to the roast that I'm making. And then when I'm making a true Sunday gravy, I will also add in short ribs to make that as well. But I honestly don't make that very often. But I definitely add it to all of my beef roasts. And it's a good way to sort of stretch that meat. It's a less than favorable cut of meat for our family, but it helps me to stretch the meal so that I can feed a crowd. I'll be honest, I'm not quite sure how much things cost in the grocery store anymore. We order a steer once a year, we fill our freezer, and if we run out of a certain cut of meat, then we run out. I don't go to the store, to repurchase. And that generally doesn't happen. I think if there's any cuts that we run out of, it's usually the steaks. And that's only for a couple of weeks, and then it's usually time for us to get our steer back from the butcher again. So regardless, you can go to the store, buy a chuck roast, which I'm sure is still cheaper than other types of roast. Maybe even do a rump roast. I think those tend to be even cheaper. You could absolutely use a rump roast, and you know what? I probably would have if that was the first thing I saw when I opened my freezer, but it was a chuck roast, and so I grabbed that and the short ribs. So use whatever cheap cut of meat you can find because you're just slow cooking it in a ton of flavor anyhow. It doesn't have to be an expensive cut of meat. When you're serving it like a sandwich, like we are here, you can really feed a crowd. You don't have to use, a fancy bread. You can just use regular hoagie rolls. You could use just regular sandwich bread. You probably just don't want it to be super juicy because it might make your bread kind of soggy. But this really can feed a crowd, and you can have leftovers the next day for lunch or dinner again. If this was being served as an actual roast, you could serve it over rice or mashed potatoes. You can add in a side, some sort of a veggie. side if you wanted to. Um, this can be stretched no matter how you decide to serve it. Now at the end here, I'm adding in all, not all, but as many of those peppers as I can find. I'm going to go ahead and throw in there, and then I'm going to add some of the juices, some of that stock that we created. I'm going to go ahead and add that over the top of the shredded beef. One, because I don't want it to dry out, and two, that's really where a lot of that flavor is still. And so I'm going to definitely kind of get that poured over the top there. You could thicken this, absolutely. I wouldn't bother shredding, like I had put all the fatty pieces back into that pot, but if you wanted to thicken that and make it a gravy, do that, reserve it into a different pot, thicken that gravy, and then go ahead and shred up what you needed to. I have served it that way many, many times, and it is absolutely fabulous. I was a little preoccupied trying to do another task, so I was kind of assisting my husband in building these sandwiches. So he is getting started on making his sandwich and the sandwich for the two boys. I've got a very picky eater, so I've got one individual who's going to be eating it kind of plain Jane, and then my husband will definitely make his according to the way that he prefers. So he's currently looking for a knife, and he ended up grabbing his favorite knife to use just about on everything. And I told him he's going to want a serrated knife. And he decided he wasn't going to need it, and then decided yes, maybe he did, and that he would listen to his wife. So he's going to go and find a serrated knife, and then he's going to get these rolls cut in half to make the sandwiches. We choose to put mayonnaise on them. For the boys, I just put mayonnaise, I believe, on one side. I'm not sure if my husband chose to do both sides or not, actually, but usually I only do the one side. In fact, today was the day my nephew learned that he was eating mayonnaise on sandwiches that we made for him. He otherwise had no idea. So otherwise he would think he didn't like it. Not that we really tried to sneak and not tell him what's in things. I guess it just never occurred to me to tell him that that's how we make the sandwiches. So now he knows, and if he's ever out somewhere and there's mayonnaise on a sandwich, he'll know that he doesn't have to shy away from it. But that was kind of funny for him to discover that. So we are building the sandwiches by using Swiss cheese. We're going to put, of course, the shredded beef on there. Those who want the peppers that were cooked within the roast will have those on there as well. We really like this spicy pepper blend that I get from Trader Joe's. It is absolutely phenomenal. Anytime we make a sandwich, me and my husband both go and pull that jar out. It also makes incredible Cuban sandwiches. I really, really highly recommend. I'll put down in the comments section, or I'm sorry, rather, I will put down in the description box the exact name of what this pepper blend is in case you're interested. And oops, my husband just made a mess of himself. It was a brand new shirt, too. These are going to go into the broiler just for several minutes. You're really just waiting for that cheese to melt and become bubbly and wonderful. So we're going to get those under the broiler, and we will put whatever toppings anybody's heart desires on them then when they come out of the oven. So you've definitely learned by now our love for the candied jalapenos that I can, but I also do candied hot banana peppers. I did those last year because I had such an abundance of spicy banana peppers. So I didn't want to run downstairs. I have 2 jars left down in my overflow and I've not brought them upstairs yet. So my husband said that he would be fine, of course, with the banana peppers. We like them pretty much equally both. And this type of a sandwich, actually, the banana pepper, I think, goes a lot better. So my husband's going to get a couple of those onto his sandwich while the boys' sandwich is pretty much done. I'm surprised the one didn't want pickles on his, but that's okay. So my husband's going to build his, and he's pretty much done with his. I don't believe he did put anything else on his sandwich, but you could add lettuce, tomato, onion. I mean, my gosh, you whatever your heart desires. I will say we made these for leftover dinner the next day. I made Cajun fries to go with them for the side, but we added some fried, what is it? Fried salami. Oh, yes, 100% recommend. We all wish we did that the night before. I don't know what made me think of it that next day, but it was so good. So this is just a perfect example on how you can feed a crowd, how you can feed a crowd on a budget. You don't have to make it expensive. This was just really good, and we had leftovers for the next day. This fed 5 people 2 times. This was so good, in fact, that my boys ate their meal, and my husband ended up coming back to make a second one for them. My husband's now making his second sandwich, actually. So it really, really was good. You can make this in a flavor combination of however you like. You could do it with pork, you could do it with chicken. I just find definitely with beef, I would say, and a big cut of pork as well. But I find that it really can feed a crowd much easier than chicken tends to. But if you wanted to serve this then over the mashed potatoes, like I said before, that could be stretched and that could go a long way as well. So I hope that this is helpful for you. This is just the one example of how I used my Dutch oven and how I could feed a bit of a larger crew. Now, I will say, when we are all home and if I have the older kids with me, this may have only fed us all for one night, but that's okay. I mean, that one chuck roast with the little bit of additional beef short ribs could feed 10 people, and I still had a little bag of it to put in the freezer for an individual serving for a hefty individual serving for somebody who might need it on a night where I'm making something and they're not, they don't really want what I'm making. I can pull that out of the freezer and kind of heat it up for them. So I hope this is useful for you. It's definitely different, of course, than me showing what I'm canning, but I like to show you how I use my preserved foods, and the jar of the banana peppers, of course, is one of them. How I use the meat that I get every year from my local farmer and butcher. And this is basically a quick, simple, easy meal. I was very busy this day, and most of the time I think people would just say, hey, let's order a pizza. But I thought ahead a little bit and said, no, I will do a really good meal where I don't have to be super hands-on. And I fed my family on a budget. So I will see you again the next time I'm in my kitchen working on a food preservation project or feeding my family. Thanks for watching.